So what we're doing tonight is it's not a classroom environment. It is really talking about, in our first deep dive, it's the roles of the hub captain, the roles of the hub manager, the kind of more holistic thing that never come up in a Hub 101, which is where we're really talking about the details of the process. So this is more for people who are just trying to get their head around, well, why do we do what we do? And then there's some special things that we really don't talk much about in Hub 101 that are the, kind of the responsibility of that hub manager at the hub that we don't get into. And so this was my opportunity to have a little bit of discussion, and we can even deep dive the deep dives as we go along. So let me get my notes out. I find out that when I share the screen, people don't like it because it takes away from you being able to look at each other and see what's going on with the participants in the chat. So I'm only going to share screens for short periods of time to illustrate something. And so I'm going to, so this is where I have to get up and squint and find hang on. Well, of course, now that I did that, so you get to see how it takes my bifocals. Oops, not that one. Yeah, I know, hang on.
You can get special computer glasses, Cindy, like I have.
That's what I'm going to have to do. And then I got to get rid of all the junk that shows up on my screen that I wasn't expecting. And where did my share bar go? And blah, blah. Oh, brother. I have so many windows up, it's saying show all windows. There we go. So this first session, what we're going to try and cover is like a little bit of background, because when you talk about hub captain, hub manager, people get confused. And what we do all the rest of the time building up to the day of an earthquake is very different than the day of the earthquake. And then some setup considerations, talking about situation awareness, and the three or four things that are unique to a hub captain role. So Anne Forrest, in the hub captain's book that will be coming out, has put together a lot of that information, but I wanted to make sure we talk about it so that when you got it in your book and you're flipping through it, you're going, what is this in here for? So I'm going to go ahead and stop the sharing and talk a little bit about the two confusing things for many people is hub captain, hub manager. And that was a deliberate decision. We called ourselves hub captains when we first started doing things all together as a network because it kind of sounded fun and we got to say hub caps. But when we actually started laying out, what do we do at the hub and what are the roles? When we said hub captain, that started to sound very militaristic. And it made it sound like that was the person everybody was going to salute and they were going to be the know-all. And we know that ain't happening, Whoever is at the hub and has the most wherewithal is going to be the person running the hub. So that was a deliberate decision to call them a hub manager. And the second thing that plays into is that there is, in the world of managing, there is leadership and there's managers. And the managers manage the process and generally the people executing the process. And leadership is the ones usually in the CEO's office that are talking about the vision and making sure that the direction that everybody's moving is doing what the end result needs to perform. So all of us who we call ourselves hub captains, and in multiple hubs, there's people who go, well, I want to be the person who's doing that thinking for my community and the outreach to the community and helping my community be prepared. They're being leaders around preparedness. And then there's other people who go, I don't want to do that. I want to run a good hub. And so we have, in some cases, people who are co-captains, and I can see those two different personalities there. The person who wants to learn how to make that hub hum like a good spinning machine and learn all the operational characteristics so that they can manage the hub well, and they integrate with the outreach and the leadership that needs to be done for the community. So that's kind of like why we say hub captain when we talk all the other stuff we're doing, but when we, I'm talking with my hands like crazy. When we talk manager, it is at the hub managing the activities of the hub. So today we're going to be talking a lot more about what goes on at the hub and the management of the hub there. So the one other thing I'm going to bring up and share on my screen is we get questions, especially from people in government who go, well, is your hub manager your incident commander? And that's because the whole professional world of emergency management has generally moved to two flavors of how they view emergency response and prepared, you know, the whole system of prepare, respond, recover. The National Incident Command something NIMS, and then the Incident Command System. And we generally get questions more about Incident Command System because they go, is your hub manager the incident manager? Well, when you talk about incident commander, and I should be sharing now, we had a hub liaison with the Red Cross for a time, and her name was Ashley. And she was the one who helped us understand our relationship to incident command. We are actually, hub managers are incident commanders because they're the person at the scene helping make things happen. And it's not like we're gonna have you just need to know that, because if a fire guy comes up and he goes, who's your incident commander? It's like, you know, you're talking hub manager. They wanna talk their language. And so she drew for us a org chart that sort of shows that when we think about how the rest of the world organizes in incident command and has definite functions, the hubs actually fit all the functions that a professional response would have, except there was one, and it's way over here on the side, and if I might lose people. It was this section called the planning section. And that was where, when we did our first workshop on how to manage volunteers, that was what we were feeling. We went, oh my God, we forgot to think about planning for the next shift or planning for what this is going to look like 2 days down. So that's our volunteer coordinator. So with that, we now kind of operate the same way that the whole rest of the United States does. We just ended up using different terms because no neighbor I know is going to come up and I'll say, I would like you to be the backup incident commander. They're going to freak out. But you know, if I can say, you're going to be my assistant hub manager, we're really just managing the hub, it puts it all into terms that our neighbors can work with and we don't scare them away. So I'm going to stop and check for hands up. And if anything has come up, is there anybody who's got any questions about kind of that? That's just like this whole structural, why do we have these different terms sort of thing? Okay, that's good that there's no questions. Hopefully I've not confused everybody. So the next thing that I was going to talk about is in the manager. So the rest of what we'll talk about is hub manager, you know, operational process related, and it's the adjunct to the Hub 101 stuff. So as hub manager, most of us have walked through our hub and at least tried to set it up, and we have gotten a lot smarter about putting the radio people far enough away where they don't get interfered, thinking about how to make the entrance to your activities highly accessible for the people who are coming and looking for how to engage with the hub, and trying to set it up for ease of flow around your hub, or would you rope things off? So I want to make sure that if you guys haven't done it already, you go back out to your hub area and you start applying the thinking that you've either seen at your last drill or you've heard us talk about, and keep rewalking your areas. We've practiced it in my hub 3 different times and it's set up differently every time. And the last one seemed to be the best one that worked out. And we figured out some visual clues about start here. And that's why I always ask people to send pictures, because we're always sharing, oh, that was a great way to manage the people through this part of the hub. So your job as a hub manager includes having pre-thought that out and capture it in some way, either in a sketch drawing or whatever you need to do, because when Ann distributes the hub books, there will be a blank page that says, put your hub layout in here. And I cannot tell you how much that is going to help, because then you're not going to be scrambling on the first day going, oh God, what worked for us last time, you know? And then if you're not there, it helps the first person opening the box to go, well, I haven't done this in 2 years, but oh good, here's a cheat sheet for me. So that is a really, really important part. And so if you're all stuck at home doing coronavirus, go walk to your hub and go home and do that. You know, I'm looking to maximize your time while I've got your attention sitting at home, you know, before we have to go all back to all our different activities. I'm checking for hands, no hands. And so once you've got that location thought of out in your head, your hub staff is kind of the consideration. When I talk Hub 101 and I talk about, okay, Ann just joined us. She missed the part where I said, I can't read the chats. And when you send me something privately, I'm like, ah. So I've got a note, and I want Ann, you to ask that when we get to a break, okay? Because otherwise my thinking gets disrupted when I have to read and digest a chat. It's all watch the hands, and Pam is watching hands for me. Okay, so spooling back to where I was. So you've got your setup, and we've kind of scared everybody by going, oh my God, it takes 10 people to run a hub. I mean, because when you want to staff everything, you start going, yeah, you know, to be efficient, it really would take that many people. So as you think about what your setup is, you know, it's who you're going to get to staff what, and that's where you're going to start yanking the first volunteers who walk up and say, you know, I'm here to offer a thing, and you go, great, we'll take your thing, but can you stay and, you know, help people understand, you know, how to post things, or can you run these messages back and forth between our radio operator? So your role as hub manager is to feed your volunteer coordinator as many people as you can so that your hub can stand up and be as robust as possible. And then those people come back for a second shift or a second day or a third day. So you know, you have to also be thinking ahead about, if you start, we're all going to start at different times, right? You know, someone's going to get to their hub at 2 in the afternoon and someone's not going to get there until 4. We're not going to be common at all. So you're going to have to go, okay, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm pretty sure we're not going to operate through the dark. So we're going to go home at 9 o'clock in the middle of summer. So you're going to work a 7-hour shift. Is that okay? Good. I only got to deal with 1 hour shift today. But tomorrow morning, when people come back, be prepared to get them together and brief them on what's going on. You have to think about onboarding your staff every time a shift change happens. That's really, really important. We find chaos happens because when we go watch different places react to stuff, if there's not a flow of information where everybody's on the same page, that's where bad juice gets going. You know, somebody tells something wrong and they go off in another direction and they didn't realize that 3 hours ago something had changed and now everybody's gotten off on different pages. So any questions just about, so what I was covering was setup considerations about your location and setting up and making sure that you as the manager are thinking primarily about your staff and how that staff is going to run the hub for you, because you cannot run it all. They're the ones doing it. That you just have to give them the sheet of music and help them all stay on that same sheet. So let me pause and brief. Jan just did an applause thing. Got that. That's good. Any other questions? Okay, wait now. So I can go back to Ann's now. Ann asked, can you ask how many people set up a greeter table, or do most people have a mobile greeter? And then, so I've got that question. Then I have Jan, then Matt has raised his hand, and then I'll read Jan's question. So dialogue on the greeter. So you're going to just have to unmute yourselves and go. I personally, we did not have a table for a greeter. We had a guy standing there, and at the drill we had in Canada, they had 2 greeters, and one stood at the front of the line and the other one walked down the line checking to make sure there wasn't somebody waiting with a high priority thing 40 people back, you know, so that they could sort of make sure that high priority stuff got moved forward. Anybody else got some examples to share? Okay. I mean, if you think of anything, pass it to Ann. She's just trying to get the greeter role kind of standardized for people. Matt, you had your hand up. It went away. Matt?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask. So, the like you mentioned, the timing is going to be staggered, but um, if you have a couple of people who might show up and be the ones to get there first, is there a sort of like initial playbook? I haven't seen a lot of the printed materials, but is there like a first 10 things to do checklist when you get to the hub?
Yep.
Okay.
That's what Anne is finishing printing and will be
Okay.
distributing soon. Yep. We've got what to do in your first 15 minutes, what to do in your first 2 hours. Yep.
Okay, great.
Yep. Jan's question and from Pam also is, or Pam is making sure I saw it. Do you put the hub stuff away at night or do you leave it out? We actually haven't really figured that out. Most of us think you're going to want to put it away. Unfortunately, because what you've got is a bunch of resources up there with addresses, and it just seems like a not secure, safe thing to do. So you do have to think about how you're going to pull it all down and put it all up the next morning. For sure, the radio guys are going to pack their stuff up and take it away. And the only, we have talked about whether we would operate at night. And if there's curfews, we can't do that. If it first happens at 8 at night, I imagine we're going to be out there at night trying to work, because those first few hours are the critical response. But that is probably hub by hub dependent. If you're not feeling safe, don't go out there. It's really going to depend on what you know about your neighborhood. Oh, look at Frank raised his hand. Yay, Frank.
Hey, yeah, you mentioned something about onboarding the next shift that comes in, and we've done it for a while, Franz and Bill and the folks in Miqua, and you're basically essential elements of information, things, radio logs, so anybody that comes on understands what's happened and what information should be coming in. You should be waiting for this, so that you try to make it as seamless a change as possible. And each hub would come up with their own way of doing it. We come up with ours. So inside of 5 minutes, Franz could brief the new Rado coming in, and the hub manager could brief the new hub manager coming in, and she or he could go from there, and they'd be able to function in 10 minutes.
Yes, on a like if you have 5 people and they all change, at different times, you kind of have to let that happen. And Anne has written into the book that a primary responsibility at every position is to brief your replacement, right? Make sure your replacement can pick up seamlessly with the actual job. But you as a hub manager also have to get around to folks or pause everybody maybe every 2 or 3 hours and go, all right, some of you have been here for an hour, and let's just make sure you all understand the situation we're at. And it's more the notes you've been keeping in your hub diary, like our neighborhood now has 3 shelters going, and so we're actively trying to recruit people to staff those shelters. Big things that make a difference for your neighborhood that everybody should be on the same page about. So Jan, did I answer your question enough? Okay, so no more questions on kind of like the setup and tear down. So that kind of transitions into the next part, which is, how do you know what the hell's going on? How do you tell people what's going on? Well, if you've got a good hub that you've got everybody doing their jobs and you're not having to micromanage someone, you have the ability to then see what's going on at the larger level. So you're kind of managers have to know what's going on the terrain to know that, that there's problems going on within their hub or external to their hub. So inside your hub, the situational awareness you're looking for, and your volunteer coordinator can help you with this. Are your volunteers doing their job right? Or is some greeter having a fight with every third person they talk to? You have to watch the stress levels going on. You have to watch that, you're kind of setting the attitude for people. You have to keep it so that, people are not diving into despair. We just have to be encouraging people and say, we're here to do the job. Let's make sure we do the job, and watch out for those people's personal safety and their personal attitude. And you may have to change out people who turn out to have overestimated their ability to do a job. That's always a possibility, you know. So situational awareness is just, how is your group doing? Kind of walking around and chatting them up and making sure they're good and thankful, and hopefully you don't get interrupted with, you know, a million things. You know, when we start, people are going to come to you with some basic questions like, what do we do about? You're going to have to make those calls or find an expert who can make that call. But the situation awareness for you is to keep the hub so that the people feel they're safe, they feel they're supported, they feel they have the information to do the job, and you've turned them loose to do the job and you're not micromanaging them. The second part is the situation awareness for what's going on outside your hub. And so that is, you know, you're kind of like in this tennis court size area, and that's your world for a moment, but you also are going to be asked eventually by the city or by someone, what's going on? Do we have shelters going on? So you probably need to keep scanning the whiteboards on what's developing. You're going to get handed messages from the radio operators with important information that the hub manager should see. So it helps you build a picture of what's going on in your neighborhood. And we've talked about, you know, like if you have a map where you start marking off, you know, like, hey, we're hearing from SNAP groups who've come in and said, you know, we're okay. And, you know, and if you've got a chunk of your neighborhood that you know is on a hillside that you're not hearing anything from, you know, that's where you might want to send part of your sneakers out and just double check that things are going on. If you know that it's in the middle of a school day and you've got 2 schools in your neighborhood, go find out what, you know, send someone to go find out what's going on. So that's where, you know, recruiting those volunteers who can just be eyes on the ground for you, where you send them out and they either come back and report, or you send them out with a family service radio and park someone within the hub to capture what they're telling you as they go out and survey. That will be useful for you so that when you are having to make decisions about, okay, well, we're going to close down, I guess we maybe ought to go tell the shelter folks we're closing down, you know, so that you've got some liaison with the activities in your neighborhood that are important for your neighborhood. Questions about those 2 aspects of it, because the next one I'll talk about is situation awareness for the city. I'm not seeing anything. So the third element that comes in with situation awareness is we always have these discussions with the city about, they may want to know what's going on in the hubs. You know, we know the fire department sends windshield surveys out, and they are looking at critical infrastructure and things along arterials, but they may not necessarily have the sense of the whole community, you know, like huge numbers of people displaced and gathering in a park that isn't on an arterial, you know. So that is the sort of information that we don't know what the city's going to ask. We just don't. And so one of the things that will be, I'm going to share another thingy here. Maybe. This is one version, and this I believe is the one that Anne's going to put in the book, which just gives you some, you know, the city might ask about, you know, is there water or not? Now, SPU tells us they've got meters, you know, that report where things are broken, and they've improved that system in the 10 years we've been working on this. So that, you know, we may not get that question, but it more might be, you know, like how many people are without water who didn't pack the water, and they're starting to try and figure out where are they going to place those blivets, or, you know, the priorities that they're going to have to respond to. The number of fires that have broken out, the number of gas mains or where gas is being smelled. Do you have injuries being collected? So we have this cat or egg and chicken problem of, do we waste the energy getting this information ahead of time so we're ready when they ask, but then you don't know what they're going to ask about? Or do we wait for them to ask and just know that this might be stuff and you've thought through, how would I go get this information, you know? So that's why when we've done drills and we've put out injects, even though it's very artificial, it was to jog you to go, oh, how would I find out if there's any students still at a school? You know, how would I find out how many fatalities have been reported? So you could think about what your intel gathering system is going to be when the city wants to ask. One thing I want to point out here is that one of the things that Mark Shepard has advised us about is if they're just trying to get a quick sense of where are there issues within the city, once we've sent them in our initial reports of, like, we seem to be okay, we have a few people out of their homes, but in our, one-story houses that are the bulk of my neighborhood, not much problem, as opposed to, high density, high neighborhoods where people are afraid to go back up in their 13-story building. So then we can give them just this quick, my neighborhood is stabilized. It has not changed since the last report. And they can just go, great, we weren't worried about you before, we're not worried about you now. They could focus on the ones that are getting worse or were bad to be, start with. So it helps them prioritize response. And we're just going to have to help them do that because they're not going to be everywhere at once. And then the last one is, if we get a chance, if you're going to send something in, we know we cannot ask for something with the expectation it will be given to us, but we can give them a clue that, for example, the shelters that we've got set up are getting sufficient food donations, but there's no water, for example. So, or we still have a lot of wounded and we've gone through every sheet in the neighborhood and we're starting to really, need some information on how to get medical supplies. So we have not gotten to the point of being told that we can put in resource requests and training on how to do that, but this is our way to communicate to them. So we can deep dive this, but when you see this show up in a drill, really think about it. I joke and I go, okay, give me a fake answer, but how would you really go get that information? We just don't have time in a 3-hour drill for you to take an hour to send someone physically to a school, pretend to get the answer and physically get back so that you could practice that. Because I guarantee one of us will send 3 kids out to go check the schools and 2 will come back and we might forget about the 3rd one. We just want to try and practice that sort of stuff. Okay, so I'm back to my screen where I can see, is there any hands that need to come up on that one? Okay. And we can deep dive that more as we get closer to our next drill, whether we want to practice that a lot more or not. So the last topics that I'm going to talk tonight are the emergent situations that are in your Hub Captain book that we never really talk about in detail in Hub 101. And it's around shelters, it's around deaths, and it's around difficult people and conflicts in hubs. I'm just going to touch on them, and if we really want to, we can come back and talk them again. So the shelters one, there are a lot of new hub captains that have come up. Hang on, I got to find it. That weren't around for when we did this. We did 2 things. We had Jill Watson, who's with Health and HSD, Human Services Department, and her job in the city is both the feeding plan and sheltering. And within her department, it handles all the shelters. And so they're like the Red Cross shelters. They have a whole lot of requirements they have to meet. And she was very, very, very concerned when we talked about, there's going to be ad hoc shelters that are just going to open up and people will be put in churches or put on gym floors because we got, if we have shelter we can give them, they don't have to sleep outside in a park if they're afraid to go in their house or their house has been destroyed. Or, their apartment has been destroyed, which is even scarier when you think of all the people in apartments. So she acknowledged that, well, okay, if you're going to have ad hoc shelters, maybe we should give you some tools. And so part of this notebook contains some tools, and I just wanted to kind of show you a few pieces of it. We made, it's not in an order, I just have to scroll around here. We made 2 checklists for you to, I hate to say rip it out of your book and hand someone, but, tell them to take a picture on their phone and go back to their facility and, oops, hang on, I got to get rid of this chat thing, and talk them through. You need to make sure you're safe. You have safety. You don't have a dangling awning that people are going to have to walk under to come in and out of your building. So it helps them make sure that their facility is set up and ready to go. So there's an operational checklist and there is kind of an inspection checklist. And this was the funny one where it's like, do you have enough toilet paper for your bathrooms? You know, please don't open if you're not prepared to deal with that, or clogged, you know, what will you do if your toilet's clogged? Or, you know, if you have no water and you're sheltering people, how do they, you know, take care of human sanitation? So this checklist is stuff that we want the shelter, anybody who's opening an ad hoc shelter, to be aware of, because it helps them walk through potential issues within their own building. And then there's two forms that we made. One is for if the shelter, and this is also something in your book, so if you start talking to a church about would you be a shelter, you can give them this form ahead of time so they can make, you know, 50 copies, because what the city wants to do is as they come up, and remember their goal is to have their first shelter open in 96 hours, which is 4 days. So we will be sheltering people for 4 days at a minimum, unless they beat their goal. And then once those shelters open, if it's in your neighborhood and the city is ready to transfer people from the ad hoc shelters into their facility, this helps everybody keep track of where people went, you know. So it lets them see how many people they've got and what kinds of special needs there might need to be at the shelter they're going to go to. And then the pets question helps parks prepare for taking those pets and not co-sheltering, but, you know, getting them to the nearby pet shelter that the city's required to provide. And language. So it helps that tracking, and this is just good for the church, because if they go, well, somebody's looking, didn't we have someone here who needed, you know, Somali, and they could flip through this and find the family who requested that. So that's one form that's helpful for them. And then the other form that is helpful for us at the hub, so it says, give us this back, is who are you? What is the shelter? You know, and some basic information. And maybe we go back at the end of every day and get this, so that we have a way to get that information for the city when they call and say, how many people are sheltered in your neighborhood? This is, we can say, well, as of 2 hours ago, we had this. You know, it's something you can at least go, I know these 4 shelters are going. If you need the per people count, we may have to go get that. And the other part about this is, I don't know what they're going to do with this because of the COVID stuff. There may be, they've had to increase how much shelter, you know, how the distancing of people in homeless shelters because of COVID. And so they may change their criteria, but this helps us sort of go, if you know, hey, church pastor, if you're going to open up a daytime shelter and send everybody to sleep outside, you know, you never know what's going to happen. Maybe they don't have staff to be at night, but at least people can get out of the rain. You have to be able to, you know, give people 20 square feet, which is only 4 by 5, right? It's not very big. And then if you're sleeping, it lets them calculate quickly how, oh, we didn't realize people should have 40 square feet. It may not happen. We may be sleeping on top of each other, but, you know, if you have choices, at least you can mark out on your gym floor, you know, 40-foot squares, so that people don't get into that territorial thing. And the other thing that Anne has been working on, and Ian Gallagher, and is we may need an adjunct to this, which is if we have to tent shelter, you know, there's just not enough buildings that are available for people. What's a quick way that we could set up a grid out in a park with, you know, spray paint, so that when people show up with their tents and say, I'm going to camp out here because I don't have a yard and I'm just going to tent, you have some order that starts, and it's not higgledy-piggledy, and then all of a sudden nobody can get past all the tents that have come in to get to the bathrooms or get in and out of the area. So that's another sheltering chapter that's yet to come. We're still working on that. Okay, let me stop sharing so I can see people. No hands up. Man, you guys must want to get out of here. What time is it? Okay.
Wait,
I have a question.
Sorry.
Okay, the hand, you got to put the hands up.
I was there and then you changed the screen. So there, I raised my hand.
Okay, so
Okay.
Kyla, Linda, Paula. Kyla.
So my question, I guess, is we're talking a lot about what the city would or may ask. Does the city know that they can ask these things of us? Like, have we had conversations that have said we will be able to answer these questions?
Yeah, Mark Shepard has been helping us with that. That's part of where we worked the forum with them. And in the last drill, we worked with the PIO at the JIC, Cornell, to start to acculturate them. And I know that the Northeast hubs have had some really good success talking to their fire brigade commanders about, here's what we do, here's the information you can come. And that was supposed to be the intent of our September drill, with our co-drill with the fire department, that God knows what's going to happen. Give me a break. I got to put the shade down or I can't see anything. One of those west-facing window problems. Did that answer your question, Kyla?
Yeah, it did. I just don't know who Mark Shepard is. I guess that's part of where I'm like, the gap is.
He's the director of the Auxiliary Communication Service, which is the Radio Volunteer Corps. And so that's, that's how our messages get in and out of the city, is through ACS. So he is like the perfect person to help us work this. Linda, and then Paula, and then Frank.
Yeah. We're going to be deploying in a park if and when we deploy. And we've talked about the fact that we wanted to set up rather on the edges of the park, because one of the things we know is that park is big enough to land a helicopter. And that was one thing that we discussed early on at some meeting or other. I don't remember which, but I'm just wondering about if people start to come and camp in a place that might be the only place to have some kind of rescue, has that issue been discussed?
We have not talked about, and so there's two parts of what you'd use a helicopter for. One is dropping supplies, and the city has, I went to the Cascadia Rising when they actually did a helicopter land, and you would not believe the space that they marked off. They did that down at, Franz is nodding his head. They did that I went to the one at Magnuson, and it was humongous. I mean, it was like the whole playfields area at Magnuson was put off, and they were serious about that. Is the roto wash area. So your park, you might think it's big enough, and
No, it is. We got those dimensions.
no, I meant you might think it's big enough,
Yeah.
but they won't probably do helicopter landings to drop supplies in neighborhoods. They're going to do them in places like the community colleges, Sandpoint, and there's Jefferson, and there's one other place, and distribute from there. So that's part one. Part two is medical evac. That conversation we have not had about what's the capability, what's the intention. And so I wrote that one down, Linda, so that we can follow up and go.
Yeah, the medevacs tend to be a little bit lighter weight, and they can probably land on somewhat smaller fields. I've worked with medevac landing prep before on the East Coast, and it's not quite as humongous, but the larger, like the military and the heavier helicopters that can actually carry things, it gets crazy how much space they need.
Yeah, and Linda, I think the reason why we don't have very much visibility is because all those details are written in the hospital medical response plans, not in the cities. So I'll get online and see if I can find anything too. But I can bring that question up when we get to start talking to OEM.
Okay,
again.
thank you.
Then there was Paula.
Yeah, the forms about the shelters. So are there organizations with whom, and this for me, I guess it would be the MEQA group. So are there organizations with whom we've already communicated to say, would you be open to being a shelter? If you would, here's some information we need. Or, like in the box, are there, I don't know, a couple hundred of those individual forms to give out to, these ad hoc shelters? What kind of advanced communications and preparations already exist?
Well, you're right. You'll have to talk that with your MEQA group.
Yeah.
Every neighborhood does it different. I've been out to two of the 5 churches. I haven't gotten to all of them. It's all that part of pre-partnering with people. I know Frank had a church that we're going to practice with, so that at least I know there's one that's already been involved. And so that this is part of going back and touching those partners every year or two, going, hey, have you lost those forms? Do you remember what we said we were going to do? So it's something good that gives us something to talk about on a regular basis, so they remember, oh yeah, we need to talk to our congregation that this was a role we said we would do.
Okay.
Okay. Frank,
Yeah,
by coincidence, you're next.
In speaking directly of that, Bill Fay worships at the Essential Episcopal in Magnolia, and they prearranged a Red Cross shelter agreement between that church and the Red Cross, and that church preferred to do it that way. So that's it's just shelter. I don't think it's overnight or whatever. Anyway, the other thing is, whenever you set up tenting on a campground, you got to focus on the fact you may have to have a medevac team come in, and you have to keep channels of transport if there's anybody injured back in there. They're not going to be weaving their way through a campground you see at bicycle tours where they're all over the place. So you really have to control your environment before you have to control it.
Yep.
So
yep.
you have to structure it so when you need to control it, you're not screwed yourself.
Yep. And that's back to Linda's question about, you know, how far along the edge can they be without getting into that space. There was something, oh yeah, so if Bill's church has said, we're going to be a Red Cross shelter, then that church is going to sit empty for 4 days because Red Cross won't have it up and running until the 4th day. I mean, that is literally the goal of the city. So it might be like, maybe you could consider, you know, at least on day 1, helping us, and then we step back and clear out so that you can become that official shelter.
Well, let me just pop in real quickly. I sat on the Queen Anne interfaith thing run by Monrad, Ellen Monrad. So when you say you look at Magnolia or Queen Anne and you're looking at churches that need to be up and running before a Red Cross thing would work, then maybe you bring them into like our Miqua group. If we could get one person, I'm just discussing for our area what would work, one of those people to sit in and see how we work. And they wouldn't have to sit in every one of our meetings, but then they could go back and talk to the people that sit on the Queen Anne Interfaith Council and say, hey, Sacred Heart, you guys got a lot of space. All these churches have a lot of space. Bethany Presbyterian, do you guys want to come on board in an informal way and just see how this could work so we don't have to approach you when it hits? Because right. Then it's going to be brand new, and the person we need to speak with, we've spoken with before, may not be there. So we're utterly new people to Magnolia or Queen Anne Lutheran. They've never seen us before. The pastor knows us. He'd be ready to go with it, but we haven't pushed it.
Yep, so. Yep. Margaret and then Jack. Oh, Margaret's hand went away.
Unmute.
Jack.
Here I am. No, sorry, I took it down. I'm curious about schools. Are they automatic Red Cross shelters or city shelters so they could be approached, or do we have any idea about that?
I've heard 2 things. One is they won't even talk to us until their last student is gone.
Sure.
Right? And then the second thing I've heard from the city is that they won't let anybody back into a city-owned building, even though it's Seattle Public Schools, until an architect is there and certifies it good. So that's going to be a couple of days, you know. And John Sue is our guest speaker on the 28th, so that's a perfect question for him. But the third element of that is, if that school is good and they can get schools back open, they don't want anybody in there sheltering. They want to be able to do that. And so I think it's a good discussion we need to have with them, which is like, you aren't going to get school open in a week, you know, so just give it to us, you know, let's plan. And it may be that becomes one of their official shelters, but I wouldn't think for the 1 to 3 day period that we're going to be able to use a school at all.
Okay. So can I ask a follow-up? So any city building, is it any architect, or do they have designated architects? Do we know?
Well, that's what John's going to cover.
Okay.
They have to be deputized.
Okay.
It means they frickin' have to go into the city, raise their hand, swear to do the right job, and then come back out to the areas that he assigns them to. So that's going to be a fun conversation. Jack. Unmute.
Sorry. One of the things I was thinking about when we were talking about camping area, you know, people doing temporary and camping and stuff like that is instead of trying to centralize that within a hub, if you go to the SNAP website that the city has and find people that have organized SNAP groups within your area, you could go to those groups and talk with them about their plans for housing people and see if they have areas that they were thinking about using for, you know, housing people in their neighborhoods, and, you know, and get a little bit of a heads up on that instead of, I mean, trying to cover our whole area. I would have a really hard time with trying to figure out where that kind of stuff was going on.
Yeah, I think Ann just happens to have one park in the middle of her neighborhood. So she's like, I'm all over this, you know, I can make this one park. And I'm going, I've got 5 parks, including Lincoln Park, you know, I may just go have at it, you know, but it is a good tool that should be in our book. And I like your idea about talking to the SNAP people. That would be a really good conversation to have in the middle of a drill. You know, when you've asked those SNAP folks to come and help practice with you, to have that conversation, say, hey, we've got 600 people asking for shelter. Can you talk with us about what your plans are, and those are expandable to help us in our situation?
Yeah, it's just one of those areas where you can find out who those people are. I mean, many of them register within the city after taking the training that the city has, and you know, and organizing their groups, which makes it a little easier to find out who they are. And then, you know, you can, just like talking to businesses beforehand as to what their plans are, you can talk to these SNAP groups and find out what they're planning on doing, and, you know, conversely, let them know where you are and what you're doing.
Right. So, okay. Any other things? Okay, so I'm going to just jet through the last 2 because we'll probably need to deep dive this. The next one is fatalities in your neighborhood. Oop, hang on, I got to get to sharing here. Okay, so we have guidance that we put in our West Seattle Hub book because we could tailor it, and we had a specific funeral home that we were going to work with. I know this irritates some neighborhoods who go, we don't have any funeral homes in our neighborhood. You know, the nearest one is around the lake, or, you know, across the peninsula or something like that. But we are going to have to go back to King County Public Health and get an update from them on what their medical examiner's plan is for if there are more fatalities than funeral homes or the coroner's office can handle. And part of that is, you know, the fatalities out in the neighborhoods. How do they get downtown? How do they get to the funeral homes? So I had noticed that at the beginning of the year, the public health had said that they were going to be working on their fatalities. They call it a surge plan. You know, what happens if there's more bodies than normal capacity? So what you're going to find in your books right now is what we knew 4 years ago, and they're working on updating that plan. So it's going to change, but I have to ask Ann if she's on. I don't, yes, we did put the fatalities in your book, and a copy of a toe tag and some basic information that gets you through. But be aware that this is one of those things where you're going to have to know how to handle it. And once you know, it's easy. It's just recognizing you're going to maybe have to answer that question. So we will kind of put this one on hold because of the change that should be coming. But it really is, find your funeral home director. Dolores, I see you waving, you know, raise your hand. It makes it easier because half of you are off my screen.
I was waiting for you to finish your sentence.
Okay, well, Margaret's ahead of you, then Jack, then you.
Okay.
Margaret?
As you know, we did some research with funeral directors that are nearest us. and none of them have plans, and none of them plan to be opening their offices. And I just kind of want to give everybody that heads up we talked to 3 or 4. I think we finally found one in Wallingford that thought they might have a plan.
Yeah.
But we couldn't just, we didn't get it.
Yeah. I had a really cooperative funeral home out here in West Seattle. So when Margaret sent me that, I sent that to the director who's working on it at King County, just going, hey, heads up, things are not all rosy like you think they might be. So that's been a good conversation to get them spurred up. So then it was Jack, then Dolores, and then Franz. Are you waving your hand?
Well, I just wanted to comment about, the NFL team is the NHL team is building ice rinks at, well, no, I mean, I'm serious here.
Yeah, that doesn't help me in West Seattle.
Well, no, but, these are kind of places that they're probably going to try to bring, into mortuary uses, because they'll stay frozen for quite a while, even without power.
Yeah.
And anyway, don't want to get morbid here.
No, it's fun brainstorming sometimes. Okay, yeah. Jack, and then Dolores.
Well, I think that some information coming out of what happened in New York City is important to consider. I mean, you can go down to local produce distributor and find out if they've got available room in self-contained refrigerator tractor trailer rigs. This city of New York, and it came out for a while, was talking about they were going to do a temporary burial, potentially in some of the parks there. I think that we can gain a lot of information and hopefully utilize some of the planning that was done in New York during the COVID crisis they were working through.
Yeah, Seattle there's a couple parts of that. Seattle actually does have a plan, and you probably weren't here when we found this one out, because it's since Patty Petish has left. The tentative plan is, should they have a surge that is so great that they have to do something with the bodies, is they will be buried in golf courses. So Jefferson and Jackson, whatever the one up north is, and Jefferson. And I mean, that makes it sound like, throwing bodies in. No, it would be temporary internments is what they're called. So they're in boxes and all that stuff. So they do have those plans, but I think that they thought that they weren't adequate, and that's why they wanted to go back and revisit them. And then the other thing about talking to a grocer about, hey, there's a tractor trailer that got trapped, because they don't own those, that got trapped here. Can we co-opt that for a morgue? Once you do that to a tractor trailer, that is now garbage. It can never be used for food again, because, and Ron, I don't know if Ron's still on, but he was down in Katrina at the airport in New Orleans. And we want them to write that plan so that we can help execute the plan, as opposed to having to, have to be the call on that one. So, Dolores?
Sometimes you don't have a choice in the matter.
Well, but you can only warn him, say, yeah, we want you to put bodies in there, but by the way, you ought to maybe know that that's going to be taken out of commission, and let them make that choice then. So, Dolores?
Well, I would just caution people from making things up. And as Cindy said, we need to have direction. There was grant money up to a certain point, and there were those of us that were given an opportunity to go and spend time at the ME's office. We actually went to Joint Base Lewis McCord, and spent a day going through all of the cautionary steps that would need to be taken in if there was a chemical release or whatever. And so there is a lot to this. And from my perspective, the bottom line is you are better to just not do anything and go get direction, leave the body there, go away, and don't try and make stuff up.
Right. Well, that's what we put in the book, right? It's like, go work with the experts, So we have to solve Margaret's problem of, the experts didn't open their doors. So now what? So
and they will have a plan for temporary place, and then, like you were saying, temporary internment. But that doesn't have to happen in the next minute. You know, you have time to get that information, what to do properly.
right. And the message tonight is like, there's going to be some extra work for everybody. You know, we've talked about going and talking to churches as shelters, and now it's like, and maybe go find the funeral homes nearest to you if you hadn't thought about that already. So, Susanna.
Go. Also reminding you, if everybody wants to run and get a truck or put people in ice rinks, there may be no power, there may be no gas.
Yeah.
So don't forget, if we have an earthquake, it's not going to be like New York City has been for the past month or two. They've got power at least. They have a major disaster, but they at least have electricity, power, and water. We may not have any. Okay, that's it.
Thanks. The other thing that kind of goes along with that is, and I'm going to jump to that quick and then come back to the difficult people, because this one I didn't write down, but I hope everybody saw the invitation to listen in on the discussion of what if we actually had to respond to an earthquake during a COVID, you know, so it's a lot of those same things too. It's like things on top of each other, dead bodies on top of no power on top of, you know, so. The last topic I had for sure was the difficult people and the conflict inside the hub. There was a great discussion when we had our psychology first aid class about what happens with people under stress and how do we manage those behaviors. And so our instructor offered to make sure that we had a review of that before our next exercise where we could kind of go back over. And people asked at that class session to actually write some injects in so they could get some practice in, you know, actually putting some of the things that we might teach into place. So that presentation is on the hub drive, and it really had some nice slides about how to de-escalate the situation, how to separate the person away, how to get people to come over and listen to what's going on. And then, you know, there is you might actually have to get the attention of a police officer to help you. So that goes back to one of our first topics, is just safety at a hub and being aware that you as a hub manager might have to step in. And so you might want to get yourself familiar with those materials so that at least, you know, some muscle memory would kick in and go, de-escalate. That's the most important thing, de-escalate, or whatever, you know, whatever the thing is going to help manage that situation. Or find a partner within your hub volunteers who's good at that and make sure they're the first one to get there to help that person. So, Frank, hand up.
Yeah, just one thing, going back to the bodies, I would like to see some really clear direction from the city, the ME's office. In other words, you find a decedent, identification, time of finding it, I don't know whether you photograph, but then how do you record that at the hub site that at a certain address, at a certain time, you found an adult female identified as Jane Doe by her neighbor and her body's there. How do you identify where you found it, where it is, so that you can track that when you got to go back?
Well, we did it opposite in West Seattle. We said, somebody shows up and says, Mom died at home. And we're like, it's your mom. Go to the funeral home because they will help you. So that hub doesn't get involved in the middle of that.
Oh, and that's not what I meant. Okay. I see where you're going.
Right. Yeah. Right. Because, you know, and so now, so that is like 90% of them, you know, it's a known person and somebody is going to want to help make sure that their remains get treated respectfully and dealt with. So we put that back to the family and tell them where to go because they may not even know. And I have 2 funeral home directors. So first thing I'm going to do is find out which one of those 2 is open, right? So I can at least send them to the one that's open. The second one is dead person laying in the street. Nobody knows anything about it. And those materials are in our Google Drive. And I think I talked Ann out of putting them in the book because what they are is the King County Medical Examiner instructions to cities. And it's 40 pages of exactly what you're asking for. right? And so I kind of go, you know, for 90% of the situations, we can push them, family take care of it and give them instructions. And in that thing I had shown, it also does say, you know, don't move the body until police can come, or if you do, move it inside, take pictures of when it, you know, before you move it to the bathtub, you know, stuff that will get people through a couple of hours of, you know, trying to find the medical exam or find the funeral home. So there's the short version, but the long version is available, but we didn't think it was worth spending the money to put that in every hub captain book.
Okay, so I think final word, when we go back to sit rep, if something has happened and we know there are a number of fatalities, if we get a request from the city, how many fatalities you have, we can come back and say we have 75, we know where they are, good, they want to come and collect whatever it is. So you track that data when you get it, that's all.
Yeah,
So
maybe. I mean, I might be more likely to go send someone to the medical examiner and say, how many people have you heard from? Right.
Whatever, we don't have a funeral home in Magnolia. Or
Yeah, I know. So you guys need to, you know, help us figure out how to do that, because I really hadn't gotten to the, you know, ticky poo of bodies kind of question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Linda Norland.
Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah. I think no matter how many discussions we have in our hub, and no matter how often we remind ourselves that we're a communications hub and that we might have a little medical wing if somebody shows up who could do that as a volunteer, but that's not our main focus. The big issue that comes up again and again in our conversations, and I think it's because volunteers are dreading this moment. They're dreading the moment when the bereaved or agitated family member wants us to do something for their critically injured family member. And we have to tell them, we really don't, you know, we only report to the city that, you know, 5,000 people are dying, not one, or not, you know, when grandma has a broken leg, we don't get involved. And it comes up again and again. And no matter how many times we talk about it, people are still really, they're hung up on that question. And I'm wondering if you have a good way in the psychological first aid vocabulary to deal with that.
And the question is, people are going to die?
Well, no, probably not. You know, okay, grandma has a broken leg, but the family come and they're so upset that the volunteers have to deal with people who are really, who can't accept the fact that their medical emergency is not the city's medical emergency at that moment.
Well,
you know,
okay, so yeah, so when we say we're communication hubs and we're not the medical experts, that only means I can't bandage their leg, but I'll do everything I can to find the person who can bandage their leg.
Sure, but we also know that unless that volunteer, let's say 6 people are at their hub, we're not sending anybody out right now. We don't yet know what clinics are open. We're trying to, you know, get this thing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've actually had a discussion with a neighbor who I thought was a reasonable human being, and when he found out that you know, Office of Emergency Management only wants to know the big ticket items, and you know, he was very incensed.
Yeah.
He didn't want anything to do with the hub after that, you know.
Well, that was like my lady who wanted to know why they weren't going to helicopter her home from Northgate, where she was shopping when the earthquake happened, you know, and drop her off at her house. You know, it's like, yeah, I honestly, I don't know what to do with those people. You know, it's just like, maybe they have to work through it and they'll come back to you, but we have to be practical. We cannot raise expectations.
Yeah.
And if a miracle happens and magic happens and the city has more responders than they thought and they can help us all, cool. But yeah.
I think a lot of it is the volunteers want to feel that they're going to help people, and it bugs them that we might be in a very difficult situation where we won't be able to help everybody. And we talk about it, but it's still unsettling to people. That's one of the big unsettling things about the hub. You know, people knowing that they might be out there and that there's going to be a lot of things we won't be able to help with.
Well, I wonder, I don't know if it's if it's different in different neighborhoods, because, you know, all neighborhoods have weird interesting characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's something that is really bugging them, turn them into a group that works the problem, you know, and if it's medical related, say, well, then great. Normally hubs wouldn't say, go register every doctor, but let's go poll our entire neighborhood, get everybody aware of this concern we've got, and get a cadre of volunteers lined up. And you can do that unique to your hub, but that's hanging up your hub from Forward Progress, you know.
That's good.
So
Yeah, thank you.
Could it be the way you phrase the response and avoid using the word no, and
Using
say
the word what?
no?
Oh,
You cut out Dolores, what?
oh.
No, avoid using the word no, because that triggers that. So if you can do the listening and practice those behaviors that you learn when you try and do that course on mental health, but you want to, like Cindy was saying, you know, collectively, let's find a way to get this done. But and use the word no, or we can't, and you together look for resources if they understand your efforts,
Right.
then you've won them over when you still haven't changed the situation.
Yeah, Dolores, there are some people who you will never win over, and we've all encountered the one person who's just like, you just got to get them out of your hub because they're more damaging to what you're trying to accomplish. So
oh yes, I'm just saying, just don't use the word we can't.
Yeah, no, I get it. Dolores, that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Frank had his hand up, and I was not smiling at the death thing. I was watching Jack's cat walk across the screen again. So,
well, I was thinking a while ago, I sat in that psychological first aid twice with a ham who taught it. And to empathize with them, to let them know that you're frustrated too, that you can't. And, you know, one of the things that he was asking at the end, you know, when somebody says, what can I do? They don't have a way out. Yeah, we can plan for this. But, you know, one of the first things that sometimes you say is, do you pray? And if I don't pray, or I might, I say, can I pray with you? What is it that will help you accept right now what we can't change at the moment? Catch your breath and let's see what we can plan. And the best plan we may come up with is we will send somebody up to your house as soon as we get a message. And the next time we can put something in, I don't know, GMRS to the rest of the our area that's serviced by our local radios. If we got an ER doc or whatever, if we've got one on the resource board, we'll go to them right now, or a nurse, and see if we can get them out to your house. But you almost got to give them something. But I understand, Cindy, there's some you just want to sort of tie up and put in a box.
Well, if they're on your organizing committee and they keep dragging you down, that's a different thing than the day of, which you're talking about too.
That's what I mean. Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Okay.
Okay, I think we got all the, oops, nope, Louise.
To me, the issue is that when someone comes to your hub with their personal agony and the city doesn't recognize it as their agony, how do you interface the severity of those two issues? And a suggestion to say to not use we can't is good, but what language can you use to say the city's priority is at this level, and let's figure out what we can do at this level without the person coming to you falling apart because they're not important?
Well, the first part, the first part is, remember, we're sitting at the hub, day 1 through 3, please God, let it only be day 1 through 3. We're really not hearing from the city because they're dealing with what happened to 800,000 people. And so it's not that they wouldn't like to, but they are overwhelmed and they will be overwhelmed. And so it's like, that's why we're here, is because we at least can take care of ourselves locally while the larger response gets organized. You know, it's, you know, we used to use the number of there's only 204 firefighters on duty at any time. And, you know, when we were doing the math, when we were at 600,000 people, you know, that was like one firefighter for every 25,000 people. So, you know, but you can't use math to someone who's sitting there going, I don't understand why the city is not here with an ambulance for me. You just have to say, they're overwhelmed. We're getting overwhelmed. Can you help us deal with this by accepting the help we can give you, which is in the form of this doctor with a suture in his hand, you know.
Okay.
Other questions? So there's not enough time tonight, which is good, because the one other thing I was going to do is show you a new tool that FEMA rolled out. You know how we've talked about mapping our neighborhoods and finding out where schools are? FEMA just rolled out a map where you can find out where all your nursing homes are, you know, a whole bunch of infrastructure information just by sitting in your computer and looking at a map. So we're going to roll that into some other deep dive when we come back to situational awareness. It's very slow. It takes forever for it to load on my computer and finally move around. So I don't want to take the time to try and do that tonight. I will send the link out to people, because those of you who are, you know, using ArcGIS or other mapping programs, they'll be able to figure it out pretty quickly, and it'll give you some time to play with it. But for the rest of us who wouldn't normally stumble on this tool, I want to make sure you get a chance to watch someone demonstrate it for you. So I hope this was helpful. I've got other topics I want to cover. We'll, you know, if I'm not sure what folks want next, I'll ask, but you know, it's kind of like, I'll just keep spewing the deep dive stuff. I appreciate the questions. I've got 3 things to follow up kind of wherever I think I can. The helicopter question, you know, making sure I pay attention to the schools as shelter as I go through city documents, and thinking about the SNAP groups and their relation in some of our, like how could we use them in some of our shelter solutions. So those are 3 things to integrate into current operations. Anne is on where I didn't think to ask you ahead of time if you've got an estimated delivery of your books, because we're supposed to go into phase, you know, COVID phase 2 here, like at the end of May.
Yeah. So this is Anne. Hopefully, I don't know, middle of next week. It's a big printing challenge. My plan was to print at home, and I'm really struggling. My printer is just not meant for that kind of volume, and even PDF files get incredibly screwed up. So I'm searching for a really cheap outside printer. So that's one thing. Another thing was language to use when you're working with somebody to try and de-escalate them is tell them that the city is involved with more vulnerable populations. Because I think everybody kind of realizes that they're not at the bottom of the need chain. And I think what I found is if you tell folks that the city is really most concerned about the most vulnerable populations, people's heads automatically go to other people and they don't keep bitching about themselves. So just a thought.
Yeah, and others are seniors and disabled and
yeah,
you know, all that.
Homeless, you know, there's a million categories that are typically more vulnerable than us.
Yeah, it does help that. Paula?
I was just gonna offer to do some printing, and if you need some help, it sounds like you may be looking for a big solution. So
I'm gonna farm it out to some online place to keep the cost down. Thank you. Thanks though.
Okay. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and I'll send the link out to this and talk to the folks who missed it and see what else they want to ask questions about. All right, have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thanks.
Thanks, Cindy.
Good night.
I got to figure out how to get the chat.
I think that downloads automatically with your Zoom recording, because I've been downloading Zooms for class, and I think the chat automatically downloads.
Oh, you're right, it does, because I've saved it and then I go find it in the file.
I've never gone into it, and you know it takes a long time to process out. I'm sure you've done that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I'm having a hard time getting them to process. I can get it to my computer, but I'm not getting them to upload to the Google Drive very easily. I've got one that's stuck, and so one of the other hub captains was helping me on that.
Okay. All right, I haven't done that. I have to upload them to school, so I can't keep them at home. So,
right.
All right, thanks.
Okay,
Gotta go.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good job.
Hey, thank you. I got to figure out. I know there's a way to do that.
You're still recording, by the way.
Oh, turn that off. Okay.